Welcome to week 4 of the Ascot Quilt Along. This week we're going to be making the card trick block. Don't forget to share your progress on Instagram and to pop along to my website to download the PDF. Today I'm going to make the card trick block, and this will finish at 12.5 inches, and when sewn into a quilt it will be 12 inches. So let's get quilting. For this you're going to need one 5 3/4 inch square in background fabric and two 5 1/4 inch squares in background fabric. And in fabrics A, B, C and D you're going to need one 5 3/4 inch square and two 5 1/4 inch squares. I've designed this quilt block notebook, which I use when I'm planning out the blocks that I'm going to do videos for, and you may find it useful. You can buy it from Amazon, and if you scan this code using your phone, it'll take you straight to the Amazon page for it. Now, let's get quilting. We're going to start by making the half square triangles, and for this we're going to need to use the 5 1/4 inch squares. For this we're going to need one of the 5 1/4 inch squares in each of the fabrics. Now I'm going to cut each of these across the diagonal in half. Now by doing this I am exposing the bias along that cut edge, so you have to be quite careful when handling these fabrics so that you don't stretch them. Now we're only going to use one each of these fabrics, and the other one you can place in your stash for use at a later date. And actually I realised that I need to cut the other 5 1/4 inch square in background fabric in half as well, so I'm just checking that this is the 5 1/4 inch. It is. So now that we've got these all cut in half diagonally, we're going to match them up. So that's a background fabric is going to be matched up with either a fabric A, B, C or D. And when you match them, they need to be right sides together. You need to carefully match them, and you're going to sew along that long cut edge. So I'm going to take this over to the sewing machine and sew with a 1/4 inch seam. So we now need to trim these fabrics, and I usually do that with my Quilt in a Day ruler, but if you don't have one of those I'll show you how to do it with a standard ruler with just one of them. So I'm going to press one of these to the darker fabrics. So I'm going to set the seam, and then I'm going to press this towards the dark fabric. And I'm going to flip this over for the cutting mat. So with the one that we've pressed, you need to get your standard ruler and you need to line the 1/4 inch line of the ruler. Sorry, you need to line the diagonal line on the ruler along the diagonal seam that you've just sewn. And we're going to be trimming these to 4.5 inches. So for the first cut, you need to make sure that the bottom and the left-hand sides line up at just a little bit bigger than the 4.5 inches on the ruler. Once you're lined up, you need to cut along the right and the top side. Now you need to rotate your square and then lining that diagonal line again of the ruler along your seam line. This time you're going to line the bottom and the left edges at exactly 4.5 inches, and then you're going to cut up and along the top. So that is how you trim a half square triangle with a standard ruler. Now I prefer to use my Quilt in a Day ruler. So this is a Quilt in a Day 6.5 inch triangle square up ruler. Now for these you don't need to press your fabrics yet. You leave them folded and you find the stitch line and you lay the 4.5 mark on the ruler along your stitch line, and then you trim up and down the sides. So I prefer this ruler because you're cutting less, you're measuring less, and you can decide which way you want to press your seams after you've cut, which just makes it a little bit more, gives you a little bit more scope. So now I'm going to press these seams. So once again, I'm going to set the seams, and this time I'm going to press them towards the dark fabric like I did before. Now with this way of cutting, you do have these little dog ears that I just need to snip off now. Okay, so now that we've done that, we need to put these to one side and get our 5 3/4 inch squares. I'm just going to double check that those are the 5 3/4 inch squares. Yep, that's the 5 3/4, and check they're all the same. Great. Now for this, you need to use a rotating cutting board, or if you don't have one of those, a smaller cutting mat that you can easily turn on your table. So this is my rotating cutting board, and I'm now going to place one of these on that board. And what we're going to do is cut these in half along both diagonal. It's really important that we don't turn the fabric, but we turn the board. Now once again we are cutting and exposing that biased edge, so you do have to handle these with care. I'm just going to check the notes I made in my book, make sure I do need to cut this background fabric. Yes, I do. So now what we're going to do is take all those pieces and put them in the block layout. So, referring to my book, so when I drew this out of my book, this was, I think, the way I wanted them. I actually think they were the other way around. So I had the green one up here, the blue one up here, the blue opposite and opposite. Probably doesn't make a lot of difference because I can rotate the block, but that I think is how I had them in my design. Okay, so these ones go along here. And then that one goes like that. This is the complicated part of card trick, is getting all the fabrics in the right place. The other complicated part of card trick is the fact that you are sewing on the bias. Okay, so I'm going to have to refer back to the photograph of my block to see that it's not looking right at all, and it's just about getting it all in the right orientation. Okay, so I was wrong. We did need to keep those bigger half square triangles that we cut earlier. Right, I'm going to start all over again. So okay, so I'm going to grab those bigger pieces of so that goes there. Okay, so I think that is right now. So these are the 5 1/4 inch squares that were cut in half diagonally, but not sewn to the white fabrics. So those are the bigger ones and they go there, if I've got them in the right place. And then these smaller ones that we just cut, they go here, right sides together. Now I think I put them in the wrong place. I think maybe I haven't. I'll carry on and see how it looks. Okay, now those other ones that we cut from the larger square into quarters need to go in the middle. So okay, so the pieces that we're not going to use are these small quarters. So I'm just going to put these to one side, and I'm just going to check the picture of a card trick to see if I've got it in the right way. Okay, so no, I haven't. So this goes here and that goes there. Right, that is looking a lot better. So that's what you want your block layout to look like. So you need to lay all your pieces in the block layout as shown here. And then what we're going to do, so we're going to pin these smaller quarter triangles along this edge here. Just need to make sure you've got those right sides together as well. Just going to put that back because, yeah, I want to make sure I'm pinning the correct edge. Okay, so I'm going to take those over to the sewing machine and sew with a 1/4 inch seam. Now, because I don't want to disturb the layout, I'm going to use my roller to roll these seams. So I'm going to, first of all, going to just finger press them towards the dark fabric, and then I'm just going to roller that along there. I can't remember which way round it is, so I'll just put that to one side. Now I've got to work out where they were. So I think it was like that. So remember, the white pieces are always on the edge. That is correct, but I am just going to have a look at my picture again. So yes, that is the correct layout. So now what we're going to do is finish those split squares, and we're going to sew along this long biased edge. So when we're doing this, we need the seam here to come up and into that point there. So I'm going to pin these in place. So one more to go, and then I'm going to take them over to the sewing machine and sew with a 1/4 inch seam. So we now need to press and trim these pieces. So I'm just going to remove these from the block layout and grab the ironing mat. Now, as before, I prefer to use my Quilt in the Day square up ruler, but I will show you the method if you don't have one of those rulers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the seam, and then I'm going to press that seam towards the larger triangle. And then we're going to flip this back over to the cutting mat. Now these have to be trimmed to 4.5 inches, and we need to make sure that this diagonal remains in the halfway point when we're doing that. So what we need to do is we need to take the diagonal line on the ruler and first of all line that up on the stitch line, that long stitch line. Then this half stitch line needs to be lined up at the halfway point of 4.5, which is 2.25. So this in here, this point here in the center, that needs to be at 2.25 inches on the ruler. So I've lined the diagonal line up along the stitch line, and then I've identified where 2.25 inches is on this ruler, and that needs to be at the intersection there in that center point. And then what you're going to do, like before, we're going to cut up one side and along the top. We're then going to rotate that round, and I'm also going to make sure, this is a 6.5 inch ruler, so I want to make sure that I'm actually using the right side for this. So I've got the diagonal line going down the center, and I need to line that 2.25 inch up at that center point. And what you should find is that this edge and this edge is exactly 4.5 inches. And then I'm going to cut up one side and along the other side. So now that has been trimmed to 4.25 inches. Now, as I say, I much prefer to use the Quilt in the Day ruler. So for this, you leave the pieces folded in half, and then you lay this long stitch line on underneath the 4.5 inch line of this Quilt in a Day ruler. And then there is a line here and you line that along the other stitch line that's going up here. And now you cut up one side and down the other side, and there you have your 4.5 inch square. So I'm going to do that with the other ones. And like before, we now need to press those. So I'm going to press these towards that larger triangle. And like before, I need to snip these little dog ears off. So now we're going to go back to the block layout, and hopefully I'm going to get it in the right order. Okay, so the background fabric goes into the corners. Background fabric here goes onto the edge. Now we just need to make the quarter square triangle in the center. We just need to try and work out where they all go. So I think that is right, but I'm just going to check my diagram again. Okay, so that is in the correct layout. So now we're going to make the quarter square triangle in the middle. So to do that, I'm going to sew these two together. And I'm going to sew these two together. So I'm going to take those over to the sewing machine and sew with a 1/4 inch seam. So I'm going to return these to the block layout. And I am now going to just roller press these with the seams going towards the blue fabric. So that means that those seams are now going in opposite directions, and I can pin them together and nest those seams. So I'm going to take that over to the sewing machine and sew with a 1/4 inch seam. So back over at block layout, I'm going to press these seams open. I'm going to do that with my roller. So now what we need to do is trim that 1/4 square triangle to 4.5 inches. So I'm just going to carefully place this cutting board on top, and now I'm going to cut this down to size. Now, normally I would flip this over and I would line up the 4.5 inches along that line. I'd line that vertical, horizontal, that straight line up the stitching there, and then I would cut up here and down here. But I will show you how to use a standard ruler. So it's very similar to when we did the split square cutting. We're going to line the diagonal line on the ruler along the stitch line, and then this other line here in the opposite direction has to line up at that 2¼ inch. So the 2¼ inch piece on the ruler has to be in that center point there. So once I've got everything lined up, I'm going to cut up one side and along the top. I'm then going to rotate it round, and I'm going to line that diagonal line along the sewn line. I'm going to find that 2¼ inch point, placing that in the center. And now you should find that the bottom and left edges are at 4.5. And now you're going to trim the right and the top sides. So with that done, we can return this piece to the block layout. So carefully lifting that away from my pieces underneath, I can now pop this in the right place, which is that way round. So now I'm ready to start joining these together in the block layout. So I'm going to join these two together, and if my seams are not locking, I'm just going to push one over to the opposite way so that they will intersect nicely, and then I'll place a pin along the top edge that I'm going to sew. Remember, I press this one open. So what you could do is you could flip this one open and make sure that those seams are in the same place. And pop a pin in that. And then another pin along the edge that you're going to sew. And then repeat the process for this third pair. So I'm going to take those over to the sewing machine and sew with a 1/4 inch. So I'm going to pop these back in the block layout. I'm just checking to see if they are correct. Yep, they're correct. So now I'm going to pin the bottom squares onto this column. Okay, I'm now going to take those over to the sewing machine and sew with a 1/4 inch. And now we're going to return these to the block layout. So we're going to press these seams in opposite directions. So I'm going to press these 2 seams in opposite directions towards the white fabrics here, and then I'm going to press these 2 seams in towards each other. So I'm going to start by setting the seams, and they're going to be pressed towards each other. And this middle one, I'm going to set those seams, and this time I'm going to press them away from each other. And then this one will set seams and press towards the centre. And so by pressing in this way, we should be able to nest those seams together. Now we do have a point here, and we have some points here. So I'm going to lock those seams together and pop a pin in it. And where we've got these 2 seams coming together, what we want is to make sure that those points match. So I'm going to pop a pin through there to where the point is on the block. This is easier to do if you've opened the seams. Yeah, there we go. And then I'm going to push that through the point here. And now that I've got them in place, I'm going to pop the pin in there. I'm going to put some pins at either side here. And over here. And then I'm going to sew this way up so that I can see where this seam intersects. I can't see it very well actually because the seam is not pressed open. So I am just going to finger press that seam open and pop a pin in it. Now I can see where those points are. And when I take it over to the sewing machine, I can sew just one side of those points to keep it all very pointy. Now I forgot to press record when I sewed that seam together, and I just want you to look at this point here. This is where the stitch line is crossing over that point, and you can see that the stitch line is on or just to the slight left of that point, to make sure that it remains pointy. Now when I open it out, fingers crossed, the point isn't blunt. I'm just going to press that seam open to see what it looks like. I'll start by setting the seam. And then I'm going to press it open. So you can see there that that point is pretty good. So now I'm going to repeat the process on the other side. In fact, before I do that, I'm going to press these seams open because it is a lot easier to match points when you've got your seams pressed open. So like I did before, I'm going to sew with the seams up this way so that I can see all the points. So I'm coming up to the first point and I'm going to sew just to the left of that point. And now I'm coming up to the second point, so again I'm going to sew just to the left of that. So back at the ironing board, I'm going to press the seams, setting them first, and then I'm going to press them open. And so there we go. Congratulations, you have finished the card trick block.